Most cybersecurity is built for IT, but the world runs on operational technology, power, water, manufacturing, ports. Today we're talking with Tom Sego, CEO and co-founder of BlastWave, about OT security, why it's different, why simple wins, and how AI changes the attacker and the defender playbook. So Tom, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Hani.
Awesome. So quick backdrop for listeners. Your path is not the typical, started in cybersecurity story. You have some chemical engineering roots similar to a lot of my family members, actually. Leadership roles across multiple industries, and then including BlastWave to protect critical infrastructure now. Before we get deeper into the OT and AI side of things, what's the thread that connects your early career to what you're doing today?
Well, I think there's a couple things. Some general conceptual threads like curiosity and the desire to solve big problems. So that's one thread. And then there's threads around the fact that I started my career in manufacturing. I spent the first decade of my career at Caterpillar and Eli Lilly in manufacturing, doing things like engineering sound suppression oil pan covers for Caterpillar. And also I was a certified safety professional at Eli Lilly. I designed, medicine plants. I burned liquid hazardous waste, all kinds of crazy things that gave me a very diverse background and understanding of operational technology.
Amazing. Sounds like fun. And what did chemical engineering teach you that most security leaders never learn?
I think if I think about the CEOs of other cybersecurity companies I know, invariably almost all of them come from either a finance or computer science background. And when it comes to protecting critical infrastructure, cyber physical systems, where you have pumps, valves, flow meters, these are things that a chemical engineer works with. They're the basic building blocks of making things. And so I think it gives me a visceral understanding of the way things are made in the real world. And then if I can overlay and work with people who understand the cyber risks, cyber threats, and ways to deal with those, it provides a very nice cocktail of expertise. I think it also I was reading this book, started this book, Range, that was recommended to me by a colleague. And they start out telling the story about Tiger Woods versus Roger Federer, and how Tiger Woods was a deep specialist, from the age of 3 and 4 years old, he's playing golf, versus Roger Federer, who did all kinds of different sports and all kinds of things. And that helped him become a better player. So in some arenas in life, it's really helpful to be a specialist. If you're going to be a cancer scientist, it's really good to be a deep cancer specialist. In other areas of life, I think it's good to be a generalist. And I think cybersecurity, because it evolves so fast and it relies on this special third vector that in business you don't often have. You always have suppliers, customers, you have market dynamics, macroeconomic trends, but you also have an adversary when it comes to cyber, which changes everything. And I think that allows and really helps someone who has a broader perspective to pull things together in ways that might be unique and add value.
I love that. Very well said, Tom. And then, I'd love to dig a little bit deeper in some of the things you've mentioned, but before moving on here from this topic, was there a time that you realized like the physical world was in need of help, and like the time that you kind of shifted there, like where, the consequences of cyber are the real stakes? Like at what point did you kind of go through that realization?
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I did not talk at all before this podcast.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that you're able to ask the questions that are really help kind of expose the things that led me, to deliver the product that I have. And the origin story here was a very simple one. It was 2016. I was in the living room right over there reading Wired magazine. Those paper things that you get delivered sometimes. I don't
Of
know if they still
course,
have these. Yeah,
I've heard of them. I've heard of them. I remember
yeah.
in some movies, 90s movies.
Yeah,
So,
right. So I was reading Wired magazine, and Kim Zetter had written this article about what I saw was a devastating attack on the Ukraine electric grid. This is long before the Ukraine-Russian war that started in 2020. And she told this story about 250,000 people losing power for 6 hours right before Christmas. And as I was reading this article, I was thinking about these cyber physical systems and how vulnerable they are, and how these asset owners are sitting ducks today. And I thought, somebody has to do something about this. And just from some quick research, there were a few companies doing a few things, but no one was really approaching it as aggressively as I thought you had to do to solve this problem. And so I'm like, well, if no one else is going to do it, I've got to do it, which is kind of bold and arrogant in a way. But I felt like I had a unique background that, we talked about the manufacturing side. We talked about the fact that, I was at Apple for a decade in the 2000s, and I got to see how ease of use can transform an industry, transform a device. And I thought, boy, if we can bring ease of use to cybersecurity like Apple has done, that is going to be transformative for this industry and help us deal with the emerging threats.
Yep, and that's near and dear to my heart. I mean, simplification is a value that I think is critical. We don't think about often enough. I think the reason why, it's been so challenging as an industry to adopt a lot of the most critical solutions to protect yourself is complexity, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lack of understanding, a lack of, not just with the solutions that are out there, but with your own environment and your own architecture in terms of what the vulnerabilities are. So I share your frustrations. I think that's a perception that, a lot of us share in the industry that we're trying to get out there, and we'll get to kind of like how we do that exactly. Education being critical these days, right? And I'd love to dig into that even further. I do have a few more here. We could unpack a lot of what you mentioned as well. I have a couple follow-up questions, but more concretely, I guess, what is the advice you could give to somebody that's a chemical engineer today who might be looking to get into this, world? Is it advisable? Is it do you, something where you should have kind of taken that leap to begin with, or what would you suggest there?
No, I think there's so many different ways to get into things. And I think the advent of, tools like Gemini and ChatGPT and the LLMs can help people accelerate their learning in whatever field they're interested in. There's also YouTube videos, which did not exist before 2000, that can give people at least an overview of what some of these areas are like. If you want to know the difference between a firewall and a router, it's 10 minutes on YouTube. But I think that the advice I would give to someone, almost in no matter what field they're coming from, is you better care about the problem so deeply that you just can't live with yourself if you don't help solve it. And that's a very high bar. That's a very high threshold. And that's kind of the way, I don't know what it was about how all these things coalesce together, but I made a decision about 10 years ago that this is the way I was going to spend the rest of my life. This was such a severe problem. I knew it was going to get worse. I did not believe that the existing actors were on the right track even. I felt like I don't want to pick on certain vendors, but a lot of the controls providers seemed like they were more worried about trying to have a viable product line, and they were more business focused, as opposed to how do we stop this existential threat? How do we start from first principles, as opposed to copy and pasting IT technologies, which work great in IT, trying to copy paste those into OT, because the environments are so fundamentally different that you have to rethink things from the ground up if you're going to have something that's actually going to be effective. Because there's an asymmetry in cybersecurity that everybody who's in it knows. It's that the defender has to be right every time. The adversary only has to be right once. And that means that you have to look at this holistically. You can have defense in depth, you can have zero trust, all kinds of different frameworks. But you're fighting that uphill battle, that asymmetry, and that's what you're getting into. So if you're a chemical engineer and you're looking to get into this, you better have a lot of curiosity and grit. That this is the hill you want to die on, because you probably will.
Yeah, exactly. I hear that. And I appreciate that. So passionate message, and very strong in terms of kind of the purpose here. So Tom, I mean, bringing that into BlastWave, can you tell us a little bit about how you're delivering, those outcomes? What outcomes are you delivering, and how you're delivering them with your clients today?
Well, this is a natural progression to the last topic we just covered. founding the company, I was starting with first principles. And I was thinking, what are the ways that adversaries go after their targets? And I had a question. And the things in life that are most transformative are not answers, they're questions. And the question was, can I eliminate entire threat vectors by design? And it wasn't about, can I take this and this and this? Can I eliminate threat vectors? And doing a Pareto analysis on how attacks were perpetrated, when you look at some of the major attacks, there was a lot of common themes. You have, first and foremost, you have credential theft. People sending phishing email, or they use man-in-the-middle attacks to try to get your username and password, or they use brute force attacks. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. But fundamentally, credentials. So I thought, okay, if credentials are the number one way that people get attacked, can I eliminate that entire threat vector? Is there a way to authenticate in such a way that somebody proves they are who they say they are without something that someone else can trick you into disclosing, socially engineer you into disclosing those? And the answer was pretty simple, which is get rid of usernames and passwords or any secret that you have in your head and stick to something you have and something you are. So the old Intel mechanism of, something you know, something you have, something you are. Get rid of the something you know because someone can trick you into disclosing that. So that was the first example of eliminating a threat vector. And we did that at BlastWave. So there are no usernames and passwords. And in fact, we went one step further because I have a philosophy that the biggest vulnerability are human beings. And the biggest reason for human beings to create weaknesses in a system is friction. So if you can reduce friction, you make the easy path, the most secure path, you've just taken a lot of risk out of the equation. And so, working at Apple for a decade, I thought, why can't we pattern our authentication process after Apple Pay? So our authentication practice is like Apple Pay. It's 3 seconds, it's fast, there's nothing to remember, nothing to forget, nothing to be stolen. So that's an example of eliminating a threat vector. The second threat vector that I looked at was the second kind of bar in the Pareto chart, which is vulnerability exploitation. So software is always going to have bugs, even that developed by AI, and those bugs can be exploitable. And so I thought, is there a way to deal with that? Because we're not going to have perfect code. And the kind of realization that I had was, well, what if you just change the entire game such that the adversary, even if it's an internal threat, has no idea what you have? If it is invisible, if it is cloaked, then it's going to be very difficult for someone to attack you. It's going to be very difficult for someone to exploit something. They won't know what vulnerabilities you have. And by the way, in cyber physical, in OT, most of these devices are 30 to 50 years old. They have vulnerabilities that are never going to be patched. So a patching strategy is a flawed strategy in OT.
Plugging holes in a sinking ship.
Exactly. So anyway, the idea though is if we can cloak the network, we can eliminate the passwords, we can get rid of 99% of the risk. And the results that we've gotten have been nothing less than spectacular.
So one is the kind of what right? Removing that from the process of essentially identity and credentialing. And then the second one you mentioned is really just cloaking or masking. How are you doing that masking? Is it, a software wrapper? Is it, a some kind of spoofing mechanism or virtual, rerouting? How are you doing that exactly in a differentiated manner?
Yeah, so we're not doing moving target defense, which is a category of that. We are doing something similar to IP masking. We're essentially creating an overlay, a software overlay that maps to the underlay such that, very importantly, you can deploy this without downtime. Because a lot of operations in OT, maintaining production, maintaining operational continuity is the mission. That's how you generate revenue. That's how you provide your service if you're in wastewater. And so availability is key. And so we do this via software. We have a software overlay that can deploy on either virtual machines. It can deploy on commodity x86 hardware. It can deploy in containers, Kubernetes clusters. You can deploy this upstream of your various switches in these remote areas. So in upstream oil and gas, you can deploy it at wellheads. You can deploy it at towers. You can deploy it at tank batteries. And it's relatively inexpensive. It's way cheaper than firewalls. We're about 1/4 the cost. And that's really important because it helps you kind of have a more spread out defensible architecture as opposed to having everything centralized.
Yeah, I love that. And are you looking at now, because the age old best point products versus a platform type balance, and you have kind of a school of thought that's saying, you may or may not have to do the trade-off currently, or the platform is going to be broken up based on function or
Yeah.
IT, OT, depending. I mean, any insight as to any of that? I mean, do you have any insight as to exactly how we should be looking at different solutions today based on the innovations and the rapid innovations across the entire industry that we're seeing, right? Just,
Yeah.
yeah, mindful. Yeah.
I think no matter whether you're making tennis shoes or you're making garbage trucks or cybersecurity products, I think you always start with point solutions at the beginning, and then as they evolve, you get them integrated into a platform. And I think cybersecurity in OT is no different. We started out with a single point solution. Now we have 5 different solutions that fit together in a platform. And for those things we can't do, and there are things we can't do today, we partner with existing companies. So just to make it concrete, we don't do detection and monitoring at all. We don't do asset identification at all. But guess what? There are dozens and dozens of companies that do this, and they do it very well. So Nozomi Networks, for example, or Dragos, or Clarity, or Armis, Industrial Defender, Phosphorus, take TX1, I could go on and on. They do asset identification, and they also do monitoring and visibility. That's a very important function, but it does not stop a single breach. So you need to have a different platform that addresses the weaknesses that can lead to prevention. And so we combine 5 things into a single platform. We have passwordless MFA, we have segmentation capability, we have cloaking, and we have secure mode access, as well as an RDP that's built in to our platform. All 5 of these things with one deployable gateway software appliance. So it's very simple to deploy, and it gives you that platform. When you couple it with one of those monitoring tools, you have a very powerful solution.
Very powerful. I love that. Well said. Thanks, Tom. And look, we're going to now shift a little bit into the growth area, and AI, near and dear to my heart and everyone's hearts. You have the Harvard MBA and engineering foundation. How do you balance your systems thinking and a lot of these kind of like your problem solver delivering these outcomes in very particular use cases? How do you balance that with a go-to market reality today?
Yeah. Well, it's the advent and kind of the explosion of these sophisticated AI capabilities are changing every business landscape on the planet, and cybersecurity is no different. What's interesting, I think, is that AI has made the offensive cyber capabilities more enhanced than the defensive capabilities. So put differently, offensive is ahead of defensive AI capability. And I believe that based on the way product development cycles work, that's always going to be the case. Now, you may be able to close the gap, and the best thing you could hope for is parity. Now, that's if you're using AI to defend against AI. But again, one of the things that's really cool about being human beings is we can think creatively in very different ways than AI can do, because AI has to oftentimes look back and extrapolate based on data sets. And so I'll just give, again, a very concrete example. If you think about the 2 things that AI really focuses on, what are the 2 things AI does? It automates and it personalizes. So the automation of code generation or the automation of phishing emails are up 4,154% since ChatGPT launched. The
Yep.
volume is way up. And the open rates for those phishing emails is up 5x. So not only do you have a lot more phishing emails, they're a lot better written. Okay? So how do you deal with that? That's an AI-born, AI-amplified threat vector. I go back to the first principles discussion we had a bit ago. If you think about things as, how can I eliminate the threat vector altogether? It doesn't matter if it's amplified 4,154% by AI. Because as we learned in 3rd grade, anything times 0 is 0. So if you can make the threat vector go to 0, it doesn't matter how many times it's being amplified. So using the credential example, if phishing emails are everywhere, but if they're trying to phish usernames and passwords that don't exist, doesn't matter, right? So I think that's one kind of way I look at the AI problem, is trying to figure out how do we not play the same game. I don't know if you remember the movie War Games. Yeah, I mean, it was
Yep.
a while ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I
The
do.
only way to win that game was what?
Well, I don't remember what
Okay.
exactly was the
It was
winning.
not to
Yeah.
play. It was not to
Okay.
play. That was the
Yeah.
lesson. Because as you did all these iterations, regardless of how good the AI was, you're still fighting AI with AI and you're going to lose. So
Yeah. 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 No.
you got to change the landscape, change the playing field, go play a different game.
So, but there's always a way to get information, right?
Yes.
And then there's always a way, or not it's targeting your individual network or enterprise. You get the information, and then you have scenarios, as you mentioned, that are more advanced and sophisticated. The offense is ahead of the defense, and so what does that mean? They're smarter. There's more money in it. They're more incentivized. They're just spending more money on it at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
And so, getting that information and then using it in a way where it's essentially, tricking somebody. I mean, you could still do that, right? Even if how do you,
Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead. I'm
how do
sorry.
you just not, I mean, how do you just not have that human exist anywhere,
Yeah.
right?
Well, this is why, again, you start to, as we have this discussion, if I didn't tell you what Blast Shield the product was, you might be able to reverse engineer it based on my thought process.
Yeah,
And what you just highlighted is the importance of reconnaissance, the importance of gathering information, which is one of the first things that any adversary does, right? If you think about the cyber kill chain, reconnaissance is the first step. So how can you thwart reconnaissance? Well, the way to thwart reconnaissance is to require authentication and authorization prior to visibility. So if you can require somebody to guarantee they are who they say they are before they get visibility, that really cuts back on your ability to do reconnaissance if you're an adversary. So that's why cloaking is such an important thing. If you watched Star Trek and you saw the Romulan cloaking device that the Klingons stole, like that was a game changer, right?
yeah,
If you
yeah,
can't see your target, it
yeah.
makes
How are
things
you going to
tough.
hit it?
How are you going to hit
Yeah,
it? So I
yeah,
think the making reconnaissance harder, and then, by the way, this applies to inside threats as well as outside threats,
yeah,
because an inside person may have authorization to access this water bottle, but that's it. And so, yeah, they can see that water bottle, but they won't be able to see the rest of your factory and be able to then create mischief for the rest of that factory digitally.
yeah. No, and that's something that, I don't know that we can unpack here in the time that we have, but I'm definitely going to
Okay.
be following up with you, Tom, for more insight in that. I love it. So, and a little bit more about kind of what people miss on that topic, right? And in OT environments, they don't behave like IT. There's older devices, you have uptime constraints, you have remote sites, you have vendors that are connecting in and out. You have don't touch it culture,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
At the end of it. So what makes OT security fundamentally different from IT security in your view?
I think you hit on some of them. I think if you were to list it, it's that the devices in these cyber physical systems, these physical environments, in critical infrastructure, they don't refresh every 3 to 5 years like they do on the IT side. So that fundamentally changes what you can do. You have old devices that just can't even run any security. Moxa RTU, Remote Terminal Unit, is the most popular RTU on the planet, and they don't have the ability to have a username. They have a 4-digit PIN, if you will, password. That's it. That's the level of security you have with the number one RTU. So having legacy devices makes it challenging. It also is challenging because you can't run agents like you can run in a lot of IT applications. Those are things that are kind of computer science related. Now there's some other things that may not quite be as visible, such as a lot of the infrastructure that you might have, let's say at an airport, your jet bridges, the joystick control that controls the jet bridge that connects to your plane, oftentimes they have the exact same IP address. It's programmed in. So you have this IP addresses that may overlap on the underlay that make it
Yeah.
very challenging. If you can change them at all, it can make it very challenging. And so those kinds of realities, the age of the devices, also the organizational structure. In IT, it's a cost center. In OT, it's a profit center. It's a revenue generating center. That's a very different mindset organizationally. And that changes all of the processes that exist in those two. So there are so many differences between the two that it really is like a different world. And one of the biggest things that we feel committed to is the chief information security officer or the person, CIO, who's just taken the job that now has IT and OT. And hopefully they've learned that you just can't stick an IT sticker on an OT thing and it work. So these folks who've inherited some of this infrastructure, we help them make sure that nothing bad happens on their watch. So that is exactly who we are trying to serve, so that they can have peace of mind and not have to struggle, because they understand a lot of the principles that they need to apply in OT that just are very difficult, like segmentation, for example, MFA.
Yep.
How do you get MFA on a variable frequency drive motor?
Yeah.
Blast shields.
Yeah. I mean, but again, you're going down a line where you're trying to square peg round hole IT in OT, and that is where you ask the question to your clients, what are you trying to accomplish? Let's do it in a way that is prevention based, not chasing after a problem and detecting and trying to block after the fact. So you're dying on
Exactly.
the prevention hell, and that makes perfect sense, right? But when you start talking segmentation, it's more like, what are you trying to do with the segmentation? Why are you doing that? How are we going to accomplish that in a way, that is secure at
Well,
the end of the day?
and when I say segmentation, what that does is it points to a reality that we all know in the space, which is oftentimes these OT networks are flat and open. And they do that because of performance needs. Because if you have too much latency in between these things, let's say milliseconds of latency, it can cause a PLC to fall over. It can interrupt your production. Now,
Yeah,
that's very different than an IT if you get your email 3 seconds later, right? Totally different world. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
that's why they have flat and open networks. And so when we designed our product, we designed it to be the latency is so low that it's almost at switch level speed. And, a lot of folks can't believe it, but we can encrypt and decrypt very quickly. We designed our architecture to avoid the SASE model, the cloud hosted proxy model, which adds latency. And there's some very good companies that do a great job at SASE, but that doesn't work in all use cases.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So for the CIO, CISO, CTOs that are listening right now, what's the fastest way to tell if their risk is out of control? And I'm talking OT, IT, both.
I would say you could, if you run various, let's say, network scans. First of all, do you know what assets are on in your environment? If you don't know what's on
Yep.
your network, that's a problem.
If you can't see it,
Um,
you can't secure it.
yeah, I think that's one point. I would say that you can't rely on patching as a strategy in OT. 35% of the vulnerabilities discovered 2 years ago are what are called forever day vulnerabilities. They're never going to be patched. So if you have unpatchable systems in OT, and you do, how are you going to deal with that? How do you deploy MFA in these industrial environments? And so, like these fundamental things that they have solutions for in IT, they don't really have great solutions for in OT, which is why we exist, so that we can make sure that, again, nothing bad happens on their watch. And I'll tell you this is something we don't really talk about too much, but if you watch Kurt Signetti when he first took over the program at IU, and I'm thinking about IU because they won the national championship last night, he said, I win, Google me, right? And if you look at our track record, we've been deployed in over 5,000 locations, 21 countries, and hundreds of millions of device hours under our belt without a single successful attack against us. We're undefeated. You contrast that with the firewall vendors you've tried to put these firewall solutions in OT environments. What percent of cyber incidents or breaches occur that already have a firewall?
I mean, probably 90%,
It
90%
rounds up to
plus.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, and 80% of them are from internal,
Right. And it
vulnerability
begs the
space.
question, what's the failure mechanism? Well, you have a lot of human error and configuration and maintenance challenges, and you have to design with the reality of the environment you're in, not point to, well, if we do this right and this right and this right and nothing changes, we're good. But that's not the
Yeah.
way the world works. So you
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
design your solution with the way the world works.
Yeah, and it's a crazy world these days, right? So what's your point of view on, what's real and what's marketing in the AI world today?
Whew. There's a lot of both. There's a lot of transformative things that are happening with AI. There's also a lot of hype, and the capabilities and use cases where AI can benefit customers is expanding every day. But there are limitations. And, especially when you talk about industrial environments, they're not big on experimentation. If you're running Jaguar Land Rover and you get hacked and you can't make a single car in September, you lose $2.5 billion. Yeah, you're going to be a little bit more open to changes, right? Because
Yeah.
what you're doing is not working. But very few people face that reality. And the world's changing quite a bit. Dragos' report last year showed that OT attacks, cyber physicals, up 87% year over year. So things are changing. We're in
Yeah.
the crosshairs. One of the lead analysts for Gartner, Thielman, I don't know exactly how to pronounce her last name. She said that, the people are ready for prevention now. People are ready to do something about these vulnerabilities they're aware of, and they know they need to change. And so I think there's a lot of tailwinds that I think are going to be helping put more emphasis around prevention, which benefits us.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. And then trying to kind of take a broader perspective now, getting into more kind of the positive leadership side of things. I know you have a lot to offer as well. So a quick one, what's your framework, Tom, on prioritizing product versus GTM versus partnerships today, right?
Well, the I would start back with our kind of culture that we have as a company, and the culture may help answer some of those questions. And one of the cultural elements we have is what we call leverage. And so leverage means partnerships typically. And so our go-to-market motion is almost exclusively through partnerships. These are folks who've been in the trenches for decades. They've built trust. And if they can, if they've been fighting this fight, when they get introduced to Blast Shield, they see how this can transform their business. And so it creates a huge win-win where it helps partners get annual recurring revenue through their services business as opposed to one and done, which is what they're typically doing, like if they're doing cyber assessments and things like that. So
Yeah.
our go-to-market motion is primarily using leverage through partners. I don't remember exactly what other aspects you're asking about, but the culture is very much about speed and trying to help these folks who are really struggling, have limited budgets. You look at water authorities. I was on a chairlift on Bear Valley yesterday, and there was an accident that had happened down the slope, and they were waiting for the ski patrol to get the person loaded on the chairlift. And so I was talking to the person beside me, and the person beside me said that they were the water and sewage treatment person for Mountain House in California. I started talking shop, like lift stations, pumping stations, throughput. Like she just lit up. It was so funny. When
Yeah.
somebody knows that you speak the same language, it's really very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to that point, how do you keep security simple, right, without dumbing it down?
Yeah. Well, so I used to play professional poker, and one of the things that the way you make money in professional poker is by having your opponent make more tough decisions than you make, because they're gonna make errors when they make more decisions. So in poker, if I can force my opponent to make more tough decisions, I'm gonna win money. And it's the same thing in product design. If you can make the user make fewer decisions, have fewer steps, not ask them the same question twice, if you can do those kinds of things, you can not only make the user experience better, you also make fewer opportunities for them to make a decision, which means fewer opportunities to make a mistake. So I think streamlining the workflow is the chat, and that requires a lot. It's not simple. It requires a lot to figure out what these workflows are in different use cases, where are the common elements, and then how can we rationalize that into the minimum viable process steps to avoid a lot of human error.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great approach and it's a great way of looking at it. I think workflows are we're able to see them in a different way today as we were previously, right?
Yeah.
And the context to which they operate with dependencies on each other within an organization is quite complex, but we can break it down and help drive efficiencies and cut out fat, throughout those workflows that we weren't able to before. I really love that answer. And then, you talk about that as a goal to deliver outcomes for the customers. Tom, how about for BlastWave, or for yourself this year, new year, any big goals, any big, accomplishments you're looking to kind of pursue?
Yes, I think the focus is on trying to make sure that people are protected to the fullest extent we possibly can. I feel there is a flashing red light that we need to be deployed as fast as possible, as many places as possible, to provide that protection, that undefeated track record to those folks who, frankly, our modern way of life depends on. So when you talk about the goals and what we're seeing, I mean, our pipeline, the last 3 quarters has doubled every quarter. So we are seeing an explosion of interest in terms of our pipeline. You know,
Amazing.
if you think about the top 7 companies that do continuous monitoring and visibility who are in OT today, so that's the Armis, Tenable, Nozomi, Clarity, Dragos. You add all those up, you're at $20 billion in market cap. And I would argue that prevention is, as an industry, if you will, for OT is worth much more than detection in OT. So it's worth more than that 20 billion. So
Yeah.
there is a lot of headroom. And frankly, we don't face a lot of competition. There are a few competitors out there, but the size of the market's so much larger, and we're approaching this in a fundamentally different and integrated manner that the sky's the limit. So what we have to focus on is the process. What we have to focus on is the day in, day out grinding of helping our customers go from step A to B to C to D. And over a course of a quarter or a year, there's almost no limit to what we can accomplish.
Yep, I love that. And with your passion and kind of the culture that you bring, and I think we need more culture, more community, and more helping people out in cybersecurity in
Absolutely.
general. We do not see that, so I really appreciate that, Tom. And this was awesome. So where should people follow your work and learn more if they want to reach out and get to know more on BlastWave?
So go to blastwave.com. You can reach me at tom@blastwave.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not going to give out my cell phone, but if you need help, if you worry about this, I'd love to talk with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
We'll
Hani.
talk soon, hopefully.
All right. Bye.